Hey guys, tonight we begin with why you wouldn't survive a winter in the Ice Age. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe only if you truly enjoy this kind of slow, calming storytelling. Your support means the world and helps me keep creating peaceful spaces like this one. Tell me no in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how this little quiet corner of the internet brings together people from all over the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan or some soft background, and let's gently into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself transported tens of thousands of years back in time, to an age when the earth was gripped by a bitter and unrelenting cold. This is the Ice Age. A world so alien and yet so formative to the human story. The air itself feels heavy, carrying the sting of frost into your lungs with every shallow breath. The snow stretches endlessly across the horizon, swallowing sound, softening the landscape, and pressing in with a quiet that is almost unsettling. You are standing in a place where survival is not just difficult but almost unimaginable. Especially if you come from the comforts of modern life. The world around you is locked in a deep freeze, and the idea of lasting even a single winter in this environment feels more like fantasy than possibility. The cold is the first thing you notice. It is not the kind of cold you may have experienced on a modern winter's night. Not the temporary sting of brisk air while wrapped in a thick coat or beneath the warmth of central heating. This is a cold that seeps into the bone, one that clings to you relentlessly no matter how many furs you wrap around yourself. Your breath hangs visibly in the air, a pale mist that rises and vanishes as quickly as it appears. The skin on your face begins to tighten, lips cracking, eyes watering, fingers burning from exposure before quickly going numb. Without proper protection, frostbite would not be a distant concern, but an almost immediate threat. You begin to understand how unforgiving this world is. Now, picture the landscape. Towering glaciers carve through the land like frozen rivers of glass, pushing and grinding across valleys, leaving behind ridges and cliffs of ice that glisten dimly beneath the pale winter sun. The forests that do exist are sparse and heavy with snow, their branches bowing under the weight of ice, creaking softly in the stillness. Plains stretch far and wide, dotted with patches of hardy grasses and shrubs that cling to life despite the chill. Herds of mammoth and bison move slowly across this terrain, their thick coats the only reason they can endure the punishing climate. But you, suddenly dropped into this place, would quickly realize that you are not built for this world. The human body, unassisted by modern tools and clothing, would be utterly exposed here. The hunger would come quickly too. In the modern world, food is rarely more than a short walk or drive away. But in the Ice Age, every calorie must be earned, every morsel hunted, gathered, or preserved. The ground is frozen solid, covered in layers of snow and ice. There are no fruit-bearing trees, heavy with apples, no fields of wheat to harvest, no markets filled with bread and meat. If you want to eat, you must track an animal across miles of desolate tundra, enduring wind that scours your skin raw. And even then, the odds are not in your favor. The creatures of this era are massive, strong, and dangerous. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and aurochs will not fall easily to a spear in the hands of someone untrained in the ways of ancient hunting. Without skill, without a group to aid you, and without the knowledge passed down through generations, you would starve long before you ever tasted meat. Shelter is another challenge that would make survival nearly impossible. The cold demands protection, and not the kind of temporary relief that a modern tent or blanket might offer. people of the Ice Age constructed shelters from bones, hides, and branches, insulating them with layers of snow to trap heat. To build such a dwelling requires not only materials, but also knowledge you almost certainly do not have. The simplest mistake in design could mean the difference between trapping warmth and letting icy winds cut through the walls, freezing you in your sleep. Nights in the Ice Age are long, stretching endlessly, and the temperature plummets to levels that modern people almost never experience. To go without shelter for even one night would be a death sentence. And then there is fire. In the Ice Age, fire is not a luxury, not merely a source of comfort or a way to cook food. Fire is survival itself. Without fire, you cannot stay warm, you cannot ward off predators, you cannot harden the tips of your tools or prepare meat in a way your body can digest. Imagine standing in the snow, hands numb and clumsy, fumbling with sticks and stones, trying to coax a single spark into flame. You are not carrying matches, nor lighters, nor neatly stacked bundles of dry firewood. You are surrounded by frozen wood, damp moss, and snow. The Ice Age demands skill and patience to summon fire, and without it, you would quickly fade into the silence of the cold. Predators, too, stalk this frozen world. Wolves with thick, matted fur and sharp, watchful eyes roam the plains, their breath steaming as they trot effortlessly across the snow. Saber-toothed cats, massive bears, and packs of hyenas all share this land, each as hungry and desperate as you. To them, you are not a threat but an opportunity. Your thin skin, your clumsy movements, your lack of familiarity with the terrain all mark you as prey. In the modern world, humans dominate the food chain, but here, in the Ice Age, you are far from the top. Every sound in the distance, every snapping branch, could mean danger closing in. The darkness of night, stretching across the frozen land, is not peaceful but alive with unseen movement. And your fire, if you manage to keep it burning, is your only fragile defense. Even your body would betray you in this time. The average person today is not built for the relentless physical strain of Ice Age life. Your muscles would ache after only a short walk through deep snow, your lungs struggling in the frigid air. The clothing you wear in the present would be useless here. Thin fabrics tearing easily, shoes soaking through within minutes, fingers stiffening until you could barely grip a stick, let alone a weapon. The people who lived through the Ice Age did not simply endure it. Their bodies were adapted to it, hardened from birth, their skills taught from the moment they could walk. You, with your modern comforts and habits, would find every task monumental, every hour a battle against exhaustion. As the days pass, hunger gnaws deeper. Without food, your body weakens, your thoughts grow cloudy, your movements sluggish. Cold seeps into your core, shaking your frame with uncontrollable tremors as your body burns through precious reserves of fat to stay alive. The snowstorms come suddenly, whipping across the plains, erasing landmarks, leaving you disoriented in a world that already feels endless. You try to move, but each step grows heavier, your breath shorter, your body crying out for warmth and nourishment it cannot find. Slowly, the realization sets in. Surviving even a single week here, in this world of endless winter, is far beyond reach. And yet, as harsh and unforgiving as it is, the Ice Age was not empty. It was a time of immense challenge, but also of human resilience. The people who lived here were not superhuman, but skilled, prepared, and bound together by necessity. They hunted in groups, shared resources, passed down techniques for fire, shelter, and tools. They endured because they had no other choice, because life demanded it of them, and in doing so, they left behind the legacy of survival that made your very existence possible. But for you, suddenly dropped into this landscape with no preparation, no skills, and no support, the reality is sobering. The Ice Age would not bend to your will. It would not forgive your mistakes. It would swallow you whole. This is only the beginning of the story, a glimpse into what it feels like to be thrust into the Ice Age winter, the cold, the hunger, the predators, and the sheer vastness of the land already seem insurmountable. And as we move deeper into this world, you will see that the hardships stretch far beyond the first impressions. The Ice Age was not just about enduring cold weather, but about navigating a complete system of survival, a daily negotiation with death itself, where every decision could tip the balance one way or another. The Ice Age does not relent. The first shock of the cold is only the opening act, the first blow in a series of trials that grind down body and spirit alike. Once you have stumbled into this frozen world, the landscape reveals itself in new and punishing ways. The horizon stretches endlessly, not as a place of promise, but as a reminder of how far you are from safety. The land itself seems to conspire against you, as though every snowdrift, every icy wind, every barren tree were part of a single design to test the limits of human endurance. One of the most immediate struggles is water. At first thought, it seems abundant. Snow covers everything. Ice lines, rivers, and lakes, and frozen crystals hang from branches. But snow is not an easy or reliable source of hydration. To melt it requires fire, and to eat it directly robs your body of warmth, lowering your temperature further. The cold inside your stomach chills you from within, spreading a dangerous weakness. You realize quickly that survival here is not simply about what is available, but about what you can transform. Every drop of water is hard-earned, each one taken at the cost of time, fuel, and energy you can scarcely afford to spend. Now think of hunger. It begins as an inconvenience, a dull ache in the stomach, but here, in the Ice Age, it evolves into an ever-present torment. Without constant food, the body loses its reserves, muscles wasting away, skin drawing tight across bones. In this place, food is not something you crave, but something you fight for, and more often than not, something you fail to find. Hunting is not a skill you can improvise on instinct. It is a knowledge carved into muscle memory through years of observation and practice. To stalk an animal in the snow requires silence, patience, and the ability to read tracks etched lightly into the frost. Every sound carries across the frozen plains. Every misstep alerts your quarry. Even if you were to stumble upon a herd of deer or reindeer, you would not know how to bring one down, how to butcher it before scavengers arrive, or how to preserve the meat against rot. The people of the Ice Age developed ingenious methods to store food. They dried strips of meat, buried caches beneath snowbanks, and shared within their communities to ensure survival. Alone, you would have none of these strategies. Perhaps you imagine gathering berries or roots, but the ground is frozen solid, the plants dormant, and the few hardy ones that remain are bitter, scarce, and often toxic without careful preparation. Starvation would stalk you relentlessly, growing more aggressive with each passing day. Shelter becomes your next obsession. The cold night approaches quickly, the sky darkening with a suddenness that feels unfair, as though the day has been stolen before you were ready. You may try to construct something with branches and snow, huddling beneath it with the hope that your body heat will sustain you. But the Ice Age is not a place where hope is enough. Without tools to cut branches or skins to insulate walls, your shelter is a fragile thing, more symbolic than useful. The wind cuts through its gaps with cruel precision, and each gust feels like a hand stripping warmth from your body. The people of this era built dwellings of mammoth bones, stacking tusks into frames, covering them with hides, and packing snow into cracks to seal them. They crafted spaces where fire could burn safely, where smoke could escape, and where a family could share heat in a confined area. You, without knowledge of such construction, are left exposed to the endless night. Sleep itself becomes a battleground. The cold prevents true rest, allowing only fitful moments of half-dreaming, interrupted by shivers and the ache of stiff joints. Your body is desperate for recovery, but the environment denies it. As you lie in the dark, the howls of wolves drift across the snow. They are distant but persistent, a reminder that the world outside your fragile shelter is alive with predators. The wolves are not alone. Larger beasts prowl in silence, their paws soundless on the snow, their eyes keen and unblinking in the darkness. To them, you are not merely weak, you are vulnerable. Firelight may keep them at bay for a time, but without steady fuel, without vigilance through the long night, you become nothing more than an opportunity. And then there is the weight of isolation. In the Ice Age, survival was communal. People relied on one another, sharing labor, teaching skills, passing down secrets of the hunt and the hearth. A child did not grow into this world alone, but with the guidance of parents, elders, and siblings. Each member of a group had a role to play, and their survival depended on unity. But here you are, stripped of community, without voices to share the silence, without hands to help when yours grow too numb to move. Loneliness begins to gnaw as sharply as hunger. The human mind is not built for such isolation, and in the stillness of the Ice Age night, your thoughts spiral. Doubt creeps in, fear expands, and the realization that no help is coming becomes inescapable. Even if, by some miracle, you manage to survive the first days to light a fire, to cobble together a makeshift shelter, to find scraps of food, the Ice Age winter offers no reprieve. The storms arrive suddenly, walls of white sweeping across the plains. Snow blinds you, clinging to eyelashes, filling your nostrils, coating your clothing until you are little more than another shape in the blizzard. Visibility shrinks to nothing. You lose all sense of direction, stumbling blindly, heart pounding as the wind roars in your ears. The storm may last hours or days, and in that time, your meager fire dies, your fragile shelter collapses, and your body loses what little warmth it had managed to preserve. For the people of this time, such storms were expected. They built deeper shelters, prepared caches of food, and relied on each other to endure. They sang songs, told stories, and kept watch while others slept. They endured because their lives had always been framed by the inevitability of hardship. You, on the other hand, come from a world where storms are inconveniences, not existential threats. The moment the storm sweeps in, the fight for survival turns impossible. Tools are another silent barrier between you and survival. Your hands, untrained in the art of shaping stone or bone, are clumsy in this frozen place. The Ice Age was defined by technology, though primitive by modern standards. It was extraordinary in its time. Spears tipped with sharpened stone, scrapers for preparing hides, awls for stitching clothing, fire drills for coaxing flame, all were part of the human arsenal. Without them, you are left with bare hands against a world designed to punish weakness. The The people of this time spent generations refining these tools, learning not only how to make them, but how to wield them effectively. You cannot improvise a spear strong enough to fell a mammoth, nor can you craft a needle from bone to stitch together the furs that would shield you from the wind. Without tools, you are defenseless. As the days drag on, your body weakens. Muscles grow sore, joints stiffen, skin cracks from dryness and cold. Each morning, you wake with less strength than the day before, and each task feels heavier, slower, more hopeless. The Ice Age does not pause to let you recover. It presses forward with its endless winter, demanding resilience you cannot summon. Even the smallest wound, a cut on your hand, a scrape on your foot, festers quickly in these conditions, becoming a threat far greater than its size. Infection, without medicine or knowledge of healing, is as deadly as a predator. What becomes most unbearable, though, is the passage of time. The days blur together, marked only by the rise and fall of the pale sun and the endless repetition of suffering. Your sense of direction falters, your hope dwindles. You begin to dream of warmth, the kind you once took for granted, the kind that seems impossible here. Your mind drifts to images of modern comforts, a roaring fire, hot food, a thick blanket. But each vision only sharpens the cruelty of your reality. The Ice Age has no pity, no leniency, no comfort. It gives nothing freely, and it takes everything in return. The people of the Ice Age were remarkable not because life was easy for them, but because they endured the impossible. They learned to work with the land, to use its harshness as a tool rather than an enemy. They knew the migrations of animals, the patterns of weather, the secrets of fire and stone. Their resilience was carved from necessity, their knowledge passed down as sacred inheritance. But you, placed suddenly into this world, stripped of all that history, have nothing. You were naked before the storm, clumsy before the hunt, and fragile in a place that respects only strength. And so, the truth grows clearer with each passing day. The Ice Age is not a world you could visit and leave behind. It is a crucible, a place where only the prepared and the united could endure. Alone, without skill or shelter, without fire or food, you would not last a week. Even the strongest will falters when the cold refuses to let go, when hunger grows unending, when the nights stretch on forever. In the Ice Age, survival was not just a matter of strength. It was a matter of belonging, belonging to a group, belonging to a tradition of knowledge, belonging to a way of life forged through hardship. Without that belonging, you are already lost. By now, the Ice Age has settled its grip on you in ways you can no longer ignore. The cold is not just a condition of the air or the snow beneath your feet. It has seeped into the very marrow of your bones. You feel it in every movement, in the stiffness of your hands, in the way your breath comes in short bursts that sting your throat. The body is a furnace, but one that must constantly be fed with food and shelter to keep burning. In this frozen age, the fuel runs out far faster than you can replenish it. It is in these moments that the struggle of hunting becomes the great divider between those who belong to this world and those who do not. Hunting to you is an abstraction, a picture painted by films and stories, a romantic image of the brave human facing down a beast with a spear. In the Ice Age, there is no romance in the hunt. It is laborious, dangerous, and requires skills passed down through countless generations. Imagine tracking a herd of reindeer across a vast, snow-swept plain. The animals move together, their hooves pounding the frost, their breath rising in clouds that vanish quickly in the wind. To follow them requires not just stamina, but an intimate understanding of their behavior. Where will they move? When will they stop to graze? Which among them is weakest, slowest, or vulnerable? Without such knowledge, you wander blindly, expending energy you cannot spare. Even if you were to close the distance, what then? You have no spear to cast, no bow to draw, no traps set in advance. A reindeer is not a creature that stands still for your convenience. It is strong, swift, and accustomed to predators far more adept than you. The wolves that shadow the herd are lean and practiced, and their cooperation gives them an advantage you cannot hope to match. They are your rivals and your teachers, but they do not share their wisdom. Consider the larger prey of the Ice Age, the mammoths and bison that dominated the plains. Their size might tempt you with visions of meat and hides enough to last months. But such visions are illusions for someone unprepared. A mammoth towers above you, its tusks curving like pale scythes, its bulk capable of trampling anything in its path. To hunt such a beast required an entire band of humans, each with a role, each armed with weapons honed to perfection. They coordinated, shouted, and drove the animal toward traps or cliffs, turning its size into a liability. Alone, you would stand before such a creature like a shadow before a mountain. Even if hunger drove you to desperation, you would not survive the attempt. Smaller prey, too, offers little hope. Rabbits, birds, and rodents scurry across the snow, vanishing into burrows and nests at the faintest sound. Catching them requires snares fashioned from cordage, pits dug with stone tools, or the patience to wait for hours beside a hole in the frost. Such patience is born of necessity, cultivated by those who have no other choice. You, shivering and starving, lack the discipline to wait, to sit still while the cold gnaws at your body. The animals sense your clumsy approach long before you are near, leaving only tracks in the snow as proof they were ever there. As hunger sharpens, so too does your awareness of predators. The Ice Age was rich with them, a theater of survival where humans were not always at the top. Wolves are the first you notice, their howls drifting through the night like mournful songs. Their eyes catch the moonlight, glowing in the distance as they circle beyond the reach of your fire. They are curious, cautious, but hungry. To them, you are weaker than a deer, slower than a rabbit, and unarmed against their coordinated attack. Your only advantage is fire, and even that flickers with uncertainty. A dying flame is no defense at all, and when your fuel runs out, you are little more than prey waiting in the dark. But wolves are not the only danger. Imagine the cave lion, larger and more powerful than the lions of today, prowling the plains with muscles rippling beneath its tawny coat. Its roar carries across the frozen valleys, a sound that awakens primal fear. Such a beast does not need to announce itself, but when it does, you know instinctively that it commands the land around you. A human, armed with stone tools and surrounded by allies, might repel such a predator. Alone, crouched in the snow with nothing but numb hands, you could not even run. Then there is the shadow of the short-faced bear, towering over 9 feet when it rears, heavier than any modern bear, built for speed as much as strength. Its presence was a reminder to the people of the Ice Age that even the apex hunters could become prey. Such creatures roamed the edges of human encampments, sniffing out the scent of meat, testing the boundaries of firelight. To encounter one would mean instant terror, a confrontation you could not hope to win. The thought of predators forces you to consider weapons again. How would you defend yourself? You pick up a branch, but it snaps easily in your grip. You strike flint against stone, but you do not know how to shape a blade, how to grind an edge, how to haft it securely onto a shaft. These tasks require time and skill, both of which you lack. The tools of the Ice Age were born of patience and practice, their designs perfected through centuries of trial and error. Each one was an inheritance from the past, knowledge encoded in the hands of the maker. You are cut off from that lineage, left to fumble with crude imitations that fail in the moment of need. The mental toll of this struggle is not to be overlooked. At first, your thoughts are consumed with practical matters: where to find food, how to stay warm, when to rest. But as days pass, as hunger sharpens and sleep grows scarce, your mind begins to unravel. You see shapes in the snow, hear voices in the wind, imagine warmth where none exists. The isolation presses in like a physical weight, bending your thoughts until they snap. You begin to talk aloud to yourself, to invent companions, to believe in visions that fade the moment you reach for them. In a world where survival depended on community, your solitude becomes a death sentence. The people of the Ice Age told stories around fires, not just for entertainment, but to bind themselves together, to remind each other of their humanity. Alone, you have no such anchor. Even the landscape itself seems to conspire against you. The Ice Age is not a single endless sheet of white, but a patchwork of frozen plains, glacial valleys, and dense forests. The forests are dark, heavy with snow, their silence broken only by the cracking of ice-laden branches. The plains are vast and empty, offering no cover, no food, only the merciless bite of the wind. The glaciers loom like frozen walls, grinding the earth beneath them, their slow movement indifferent to all life. Each environment poses its own challenges, each one unforgiving. To travel through them is to court exhaustion, frostbite, and despair. And yet, amidst all this hardship, the people of the Ice Age endured. They hunted with skill, shared with generosity, and sheltered with ingenuity. They crafted clothing from furs that shielded them from the wind, stitched with sinew and shaped with bone needles. They carved spears with flint points, each one deadly in skilled hands. They painted the walls of caves with images of the animals they depended on, symbols of reverence and hope. Their survival was not a matter of chance, but of knowledge, community, and adaptability. You, without these gifts, are a stranger here. The land does not recognize you, the animals do not fear you, and the cold does not spare you. As the days stretch into weeks, your body weakens further. The gnawing in your stomach becomes a constant companion, the ache in your limbs a reminder of your fragility. Each task becomes slower, heavier. To rise from sleep is an effort, to gather firewood a burden, to keep walking an act of willpower alone. Your body consumes itself, drawing on fat and muscle, shrinking you from within. The cold exploits every weakness, turning shivers into tremors, tremors into numbness, numbness into stillness. The winter of the Ice Age is not a season to be endured alone. It is a gauntlet designed to test the limits of human resilience. And without the knowledge, tools, and community of those who lived then, you would not last. Survival here is not about bravery or determination. It is about belonging to a lineage that knew the secrets of the cold, that understood the land, that carried forward the wisdom of generations. You are an outsider in every sense, and the Ice Age has no mercy for outsiders, and so the truth deepens. You could not hunt, could not defend, could not endure. The predators would watch from the shadows, The cold would gnaw from within, and the hunger would hollow you until nothing remained. This world belongs to those who were shaped by it, and you are not among them. The days of hunger and cold now bleed into one another, indistinguishable except for the rising and setting of a sun that does little to warm you. You no longer count the hours by the light, because the light itself feels like a trick, faint and fleeting, abandoned as soon as it arrives. The Ice Age has made you a creature of shadows and endurance. But endurance without preparation is simply suffering extended. Your body is already paying its toll. One of the gravest mistakes you would make in this frozen age is underestimating the importance of clothing. What seems to you like mere fabric and fashion is, in truth, the barrier between life and death. The people of the Ice Age knew this intimately. They clothed themselves in layers of fur, stitched hides together with bone needles, and wrapped their children in the softest pelts. They treated clothing not as comfort, but as armor. A hunter without fur would not return from the plains. A child without coverings would not see another morning. You, however, arrive with nothing suited for the deep cold. Your garments, woven in times of mild weather and temperate climates, are torn apart by the wind. They let the frost creep in through every seam, every thread, until it finds your skin. The first sensation is sharp, then numbing, then deadly. Hypothermia begins quietly, with a shiver you try to ignore, but as the hours pass, the shiver grows violent, uncontrollable. Your teeth chatter until your jaw aches, your muscles convulse until you can no longer hold anything steady. At first you might think the shaking proves your body is fighting back, but in truth it is proof of your decline. When the shivering stops, it will not mean safety. It will mean that your body has given up. The Ice Age people fought this battle by learning the secrets of fire. Fire was not just light in the darkness. It was warmth, safety, and survival distilled into flame. But fire is a fickle ally, and to call it forth requires skill. The simple act of striking sparks is deceptive. You may strike stone against stone and see a brief flash, a glimmer that fades as quickly as it appeared. The people of the Ice Age, however, knew what tinder would catch the spark. Dry moss, fine shavings, the soft inner bark of certain trees. They gathered it carefully, dried it, guarded it against dampness. To them, a handful of moss was as valuable as a weapon. Without such knowledge, you find yourself hunched over a pile of snow-damp twigs, sparks landing and dying without result. Each attempt steals energy you cannot spare, leaving your fingers numb and your hope fainter. Imagine now that you somehow succeed, that a flame takes hold, flickering weakly in the cold air. You feed it with twigs, then branches, coaxing it to life with trembling breath. For a moment, you are bathed in its glow, the shadows retreating, the cold easing from your skin. This moment is a fragile triumph, but one that cannot last. For fire must be fed constantly, and the world around you is not generous. Every branch you find is buried beneath snow, every log frozen stiff with ice. To break wood with bare hands is agony, to chop with improvised tools near impossible. The people of the Ice Age carried knowledge of which woods burned brightest, which smoldered, which cracked and spat. They carried embers in bundles of bark and moss from one camp to another, ensuring they would never be caught unprepared. You carry nothing. When your flame gutters out, the cold rushes back with a vengeance, mocking your fragile effort. Without warmth, you retreat into shelter. But here again, the gulf between you and the Ice Age dwellers yawns wide. The caves of that time were not simply dark hollows in the rock. They were transformed into sanctuaries by human hands. Fires burned at the entrances, hides stretched across openings to block the wind, sleeping areas lined with furs and straw. In such places, the cold was held at bay just enough for survival. In contrast, your idea of shelter is crude and insufficient. You huddle beneath a fallen tree or dig into a drift of snow, but the protection is fleeting. The wind finds you, the snow collapses, the dampness seeps through. You do not rest so much as you pause between bouts of shivering, each pause shorter than the last. The people of the Ice Age also built temporary huts from mammoth bones and hides, remarkable feats of ingenuity that made use of the very creatures they hunted. These structures were not crude but carefully arranged, bones interlocked, hides stitched and secured, smoke holes left for fires. Inside, families gathered close, bodies pressed together for warmth, voices weaving stories to pass the time. The stories were not mere distractions. They were lifelines of memory and meaning, reminders of who they were and why they endured. For you, the silence of your isolation is unbearable. Without companions, the dark presses heavier. You hear every sound as a threat, every silence as a promise of something worse. The absence of community is perhaps your greatest disadvantage. Survival in the Ice Age was not an individual feat, but a collective one. A single hunter could not face a mammoth, but a band of hunters could. A single family could not guard a fire through the night, but a group of families could take turns. Children were not just burdens, but apprentices, learning skills from their elders, carrying forward the knowledge that kept them alive. Elders, in turn, carried the wisdom of decades, advising the young on where to hunt, how to read the sky, which paths were safe. Every member of the community was a thread in the tapestry of survival, and if one thread broke, the others wove tighter. You, standing alone in this frozen world, are not a thread, but a loose strand, fraying in the wind. Consider the spiritual side of these communities, the rituals and beliefs that bound them to the land and to each other. The Ice Age was not just endured but understood through myth and symbol. The people painted animals on cave walls, not merely as art but as prayers, as connections to the creatures they depended upon. Each hunt was not just a test of skill but a sacred act, with rituals to honor the life taken and to ensure balance with the world. These practices gave meaning to the hardship, a reason to keep fighting through the cold and the hunger. You, with no such framework, drift in despair. Each failure feels final, each hardship meaningless. Without belief, the cold feels absolute. Your body, weakened by lack of food and warmth, begins to betray you in subtle ways. Your skin cracks where the wind bites, your lips split until they bleed. Blisters form on your feet from walking in frozen boots, the dampness never fully drying. Each step is a reminder of pain, each pause a reminder of exhaustion. At night, your joints stiffen, your breath slows, and you curl tighter as if trying to fold yourself away from the cold. The line between waking and sleeping blurs, and with it blurs the line between life and death. And yet, even in this misery, the Ice Age people would not have seen only despair. They found beauty in their world, harsh as it was. The night skies stretched wide and brilliant, stars burning in patterns that told stories and guided their paths. The aurora danced above them in green and red veils, a spectacle that no roof could hide. The snow sparkled in the moonlight, every flake a jewel, every drift a canvas of light and shadow. These wonders offered comfort, a reminder that the world was not only cruel but magnificent. You, however, see little of this. Your eyes are clouded by hunger, your mind dulled by cold. The stars blur into one another. The aurora fades into haze. The snow is only another obstacle. Without the strength to marvel, you are blind to the gifts that sustained those who truly belonged here. As the days draw longer in your suffering, the inevitable approaches. Your body, pushed past its limits, begins to shut down. The shivering has ceased, replaced by a strange stillness. You feel warmth, though it is not real. It is the warmth of surrender, of a body no longer fighting. This false comfort lulls you, whispering that rest will be enough, that sleep will bring relief. In truth, it is the edge of the end. The Ice Age has tested you and found you wanting. For those who lived then, this was not a rare story. Many did not survive the winter, even with knowledge and community. Children perished, elders faded, hunters were lost. But their people endured because the group carried forward what the individual could not. They remembered, they adapted, they shared. This is the legacy of survival in the Ice Age, a legacy you cannot claim. Alone, unskilled, and unprepared, you do not last a day, let alone a winter dot, and so. The truth closes around you like the frost. The Ice Age was not a place for the unprepared. It was a crucible that forged humanity through struggle, that demanded knowledge, strength, and unity. Without these, you are nothing more than a fleeting shadow in a world of ice. If you were to survive even the first desperate weeks of the Ice Age winter, you would discover that it was not simply your ability to endure cold or hunger that determined life or death, but your place among others. Alone, you are fragile, as brittle as the ice that cracks beneath your feet. But within a group, even the smallest embers of warmth and food could be fanned into something greater. The Ice Age was not only a test of individual strength, it was a theater of cooperation, ritual, and shared purpose. This was the true secret of survival. Picture yourself stumbling into a small band of hunter-gatherers, perhaps 20 or 30 in number. They have their camp arranged with deliberate care. At the center, a fire burns low, protected from the wind by stones and animal hides. Around it, families cluster together, the youngest kept warm between their mothers' bodies and the layered furs beneath them. The hunters are apart, checking their spears and scraping hides, preparing for the next attempt at securing food. Everyone has a role, even the smallest child. To live through winter meant living as part of this intricate web. The division of labor was not random. Certain tasks fell to those whose strength and experience suited them. Men, often but not always, took to the dangerous hunt. Women gathered and prepared food, stitched clothing, and tended to fires. Elders, though too frail to hunt or gather, carried the most valuable tool of all, memory. They were walking libraries, repositories of where the herds once moved, which plants cured fevers, which caves were safe from collapse, which rivers flooded without warning. In a world without writing, every lesson was stored in human minds and carried forward in stories. An elder's words could be the difference between survival and starvation, and their presence was treated as treasure. You, raised in a time when knowledge is written in books and stored in machines, are suddenly illiterate in the truest sense. You cannot recite the migrations of the herds, cannot name the stars that point the way, cannot predict the shift of weather from the taste of the wind. You are as useful as a child without the adaptability of one, too old to learn quickly, too young in this world to teach. The group sees you for what you are, another mouth to feed, another body to shelter. In times of abundance, perhaps they would keep you, let you learn slowly, absorb skills at the pace of seasons. But in the scarcity of winter, mercy is weighed against survival. For those within the group, cooperation is not sentimental. It is strategic. When they hunt, they do so together, spreading in a crescent to drive animals toward spears. A lone hunter is foolish, easily gored or trampled. But many hunters, moving in rhythm, can bring down a beast far larger than themselves. When they share the kill, each portion is divided according to need and contribution. Children are fed first, mothers next, hunters afterward. This is not fairness in the way you understand it, but balance in the way nature demands it. Without such balance, resentment festers, and resentment in winter is as lethal as hunger. The rhythm of their days is guided not just by survival tasks, but by ritual. At dawn, the fire is fed with offerings, a piece of bone or fat tossed into the flames. This act is more than superstition. It is a form of insurance, a way of binding the group together under the belief that unseen forces watch and respond. To you, it may appear primitive, even futile. Yet without ritual, the weight of fear becomes unbearable. Ritual transforms dread into purpose. Each gesture, each chant, each line painted on a cave wall is a reminder that life has meaning beyond endurance. Imagine the walls of a cave adorned with ochre animals, mammoths, bison, horses, each drawn with careful strokes. These are not idle decorations. They are promises, prayers, perhaps even guides for the hunts to come. Around the fire, children stare at the glowing forms, learning to see the world not only as it is, but as it should be. The cave itself becomes a shared memory, a place where the living commune with those who came before. To step into such a space is to feel your smallness and your belonging all at once. You, uninitiated, stand apart, without the stories to anchor you. The images are only strange shapes in the dark. The community's survival also rests upon unspoken rules. Food is shared, fire is tended, tools are cared for, and disobedience is punished not by law but by necessity. A selfish hand taking more than its share endangers the whole. A careless sleeper who lets the fire burn out dooms everyone to frostbite and misery. In such cases, there is little patience for excuses. The group might shame the offender, might strike them, might cast them out entirely. Exile, in the Ice Age, is no sentence of freedom. It is death dressed as liberty. You would not last a single night beyond the circle of fire. Among them, bonds are not only practical but emotional. They sing together, their voices rising above the wind. They laugh, even here, finding joy in the smallest things. A well-told story, a child's mimicry, the way sparks dance toward the cave ceiling. These moments of lightness are not luxuries. They are medicine for the spirit, reminders that even in the Ice Age, life was not only pain but also connection. You, unable to join in, carry only your silence. You do not know the songs, cannot shape the words, and so you remain outside the circle. The firelight flickering on your face but not in your heart. The children, quick and curious, absorb everything. They watch as hides are scraped with stone blades, as sinew is twisted into thread, as arrows are tipped with flint. They practice with small tools, their fingers clumsy at first, but sharper with every attempt. Childhood is not a protected bubble, but an apprenticeship, and each failure is a lesson pressed into memory. These children will become the hunters, the gatherers, the storytellers. They are the future of the group, the reason the elders endure, the reason the parents sacrifice. And you, watching them, realize how wide the gulf is between you and them. They have been raised to this life, molded by it from the moment they took their first breath. You have stumbled into it unprepared, and no apprenticeship can rescue you from the lateness of your arrival. But perhaps the most striking difference is not in what they do, but in how they perceive themselves. To them, survival is not a solitary struggle, but a shared existence. The line between self and group is blurred. To harm the group is to harm oneself. To strengthen the group is to ensure one's own survival. They do not conceive of independence as you do, as a kind of freedom. Their freedom is found in unity. The Ice Age does not allow another form of life. You may imagine that with time, with careful observation, you could learn to fit in, to mimic their gestures, to adopt their ways. But time is the one resource the winter does not provide. Every day is a test, and failure comes swiftly. By the time you manage to stitch a crude seam, frostbite has already clinged your fingers. By the time you recognize which tracks belong to deer and which to wolves, hunger has already hollowed your belly. Their learning is a lifelong inheritance, not a lesson taught in days. You cannot simply step into their world. Their world must grow you from birth, and so, even among them, you are not truly one of them. You sit at the fire, but the warmth does not feel the same. You eat their food, but you have not earned it. You hear their songs, but you cannot sing. You may linger in their company for a time, but you remain an outsider, a fragile body in a brutal age, surviving only at their mercy. This is the second truth of the Ice Age. Survival was not only a matter of fur and fire, but of belonging. Without a group, you are doomed. Without knowledge passed down through generations, you are helpless. Without ritual and belief, you are lost. The cold alone is not what kills you. It is isolation. It is ignorance. It is the absence of a thread in the great weaving of human endurance. If you had managed to remain with a group through the first lean weeks of the Ice Age winter, you would soon discover that food was not found in small comforts like gathered roots or frozen berries, but in dangerous hunts that carried the weight of life and death. The cold could be endured with fire, the hunger could be stretched with scraps, but the only way to replenish the strength of the group was to bring down animals larger than men, beasts that were as much a threat as they were a promise. The preparation for such a hunt was not impulsive. It began long before the spears were lifted or the bows were strung. The hunters studied the tracks pressed into frozen earth, the broken twigs where a great body had passed, the faint scent carried by the wind. They knew the movements of mammoths, the paths of bison, the wandering of woolly rhinoceroses. They could look at a trail and tell you how many animals had passed, how long ago, whether they were strong or sickly, restless or calm. This was not guesswork. It was a reading of the world as carefully as you read a book. Every mark on the ground, every shift in the air was a line of text to them, and they had been reading since childhood. You, stumbling beside them, would see only snow and stone. Where they find clues, you see nothing but you cannot read the earth, and because of that, you cannot prepare. To hunt without preparation is suicide, and in the Ice Age, suicide takes others with you. When the decision was made to hunt, the group moved with solemn determination. Spears tipped with sharpened stone were carried in bundles. Bows, strung with sinew, were checked for cracks. Stone knives were tucked into belts, ready not only for butchering, but also for defense if things went wrong. The hunters daubed their faces with soot or ochre, less for disguise than for unity. It was ritual again, a way of binding their fear into a collective force. Each gesture reminded them that they were not alone in the task ahead. Picture the hunters spreading across a snowy plain, their breath rising in pale streams. In the distance, a herd of mammoths grazes slowly, pulling up frozen grasses with their tusks, their immense forms swaying against the horizon. To you, the sight is majestic, even beautiful. To the hunters, it is a calculation. They do not see the grandeur first. They see the calf at the edge of the herd, smaller, weaker, more easily separated. They see the older bull, limping slightly, his tusks scarred from battles long past. They know they cannot take a healthy adult at the center, for the herd would circle in defense, and men would be crushed beneath tusks and feet. The art of survival is the art of strategy, and they choose targets as carefully as you might choose your words. The approach is slow, deliberate. Hunters fan out in a crescent, using the wind to mask their scent. Every footfall is measured, every sound considered, and yet even the most careful approach can falter, for animals are not passive. They are watchful, aware, ready to defend themselves. The moment a mammoth lifts its head and bellows, the calm plain becomes a battlefield. The charge of a mammoth is not like the charge of any creature you have known. The earth itself seems to shudder under its weight, snow spraying in waves as it rushes forward. Its tusks curve like scythes, long enough to impale and lift a man clear off the ground. Its trunk thrashes, a weapon as versatile as any spear. Hunters scatter, their lives balanced on the thin edge between bravery and terror. They throw spears with desperate precision, aiming for the thick muscles of the flank, the softer joints of the legs, the vulnerable underside of the beast. Each strike is a gamble, each miss a risk of death. You, frozen in panic, cannot act. You grip your crude spear, but your arms are weak, your aim unsteady. The beast charges, and you would likely turn and run, though running only makes you prey. To stand is courage. To stand is training. To stand is years of knowing that hesitation kills not only you, but the people beside you. The hunters stand. You do not. And in that moment, the gap between you and them becomes fatal. Yet sometimes, against all odds, the strategy works. A spear finds its mark, another pierces deep, and the beast falters, roaring in pain. It staggers, weakened not by one blow, but by many, by the coordinated assault of men who know their lives depend on unity. When it falls, the sound is like thunder, shaking the air, echoing across the plain. The hunters approach carefully, for a wounded mammoth is still dangerous. Only when it no longer moves do they rush forward, knives flashing, hands working quickly to harvest the reward. The butchering is a ritual in itself. Every piece of the animal is used. Flesh is cut into strips, fat is collected for fuel, sinew is taken for thread, bones are shaped into tools. Hide is peeled away to become clothing and shelter. Nothing is wasted. To waste is to insult both the animal and the group, to squander the gift that cost blood and courage to obtain. Around the carcass, the hunters work in silence at first, then with low murmurs, then with laughter as relief floods their bodies. They are alive. They have food. For now, the relentless winter is held at bay. For you, the scene is overwhelming. The smell of blood fills your nostrils, hot and metallic, clashing with the icy air. The ground is slick beneath your boots. Your hands tremble at the sight of so much life reduced to meat. You might gag, you might falter, You might hesitate to plunge your knife into flesh, but hesitation is not allowed. The work must be done quickly before predators arrive. Wolves drawn by scent, cave lions prowling at the edges, scavenger birds circling overhead. The Ice Age does not allow sentimentality in the face of survival, and when the work is finished, when the meat is wrapped in hides and carried back to camp, a new ritual begins. Around the fire, the group gathers, and the meat is roasted, boiled, preserved in smoke. Songs are sung not only of the hunt, but of those who hunted before, ancestors who stood against the cold and won. Children are fed first, their mouths greasy with fat, their bellies swelling with nourishment. The hunters eat next, their strength restored. Elders chew slowly, savoring the taste as they murmur blessings. It is more than a meal. It is proof that the group endures. You, seated at the edge of the circle, take your portion with gratitude, though you feel the stares of others. You did not throw a spear. You did not risk your life beneath the tusks. You have eaten, but you have not earned the right to the story of the hunt. In time, such stares become heavy, a silent reminder that in this world, contribution is survival. Without it, you remain a burden. The hunt, however, is not always successful. Often the beasts escape, or worse, they charge and wound. A broken leg, a gored chest, a crushed skull. These are the prices of failure. The group returns with nothing but exhaustion and grief, forced to endure on scraps, to chew on bones already stripped of marrow. In such moments, the fire burns lower, the songs grow quiet, the laughter vanishes. Hope becomes thin as the smoke rising into the cold night air. The predators are never far in these times of weakness. Wolves stalk the shadows, their eyes glinting with hunger. Lions prowl the edges of the camp, their growls vibrating in the dark. Even the smallest scavengers, hyenas, foxes, crows, circle, waiting for the moment when humans falter. To keep them at bay requires constant vigilance, fires burning through the night, guards who shiver as they clutch their spears. You, exhausted, would fall asleep, unaware of the danger until claws and teeth were upon you. But they, trained by necessity, endure the wakefulness. Their eyes are sharp, their hands steady. They know that the cold is not the only killer. In this theater of struggle, you come to understand the nature of Ice Age life. Food is not merely fuel. It is the heartbeat of the group, the center around which ritual, strategy, and identity revolve. Every hunt is a gamble, every meal a victory, every failure a brush with death. To eat is to live another day, and to starve is to die slowly. Bones showing beneath skin, breath growing shallow in the bitter dark. And yet, within this constant dance of hunger and danger, there is beauty. The unity of the hunters, the trust between companions, the shared triumph of firelight and feast. For them, this is life not as misery but as meaning. For you, watching from the outside, it is a reminder that survival in the Ice Age was never a solitary act, but a performance of courage and community, repeated endlessly against the backdrop of an unforgiving world. Once the hunger of the group was satisfied, another challenge pressed in from all sides. The bitter cold that seemed to gnaw at flesh and bone without pause. It was not enough to kill great beasts for their meat. The Ice Age demanded constant defense against the elements themselves. The night winds cut like blades, the snow-buried pathways and shelters, and the cold crept into every crack, seeping into bodies until fingers went stiff and lips turned blue. Without protection, no amount of food could keep you alive. Shelter was the first line of defense, and its construction was both necessity and art. For you, use 2 walls of wood and stone raised by machines, the work would seem primitive. But in truth, these shelters were marvels of ingenuity, crafted from the raw materials of a frozen world. Large bones of mammoths, rib cages the size of archways, were dragged into place to form frameworks. Hides, thick and heavy, were stretched across these frames to block the wind. Their seams sealed with fat or sinew to prevent drafts. In the absence of wood, tusks became beams, and skulls became anchors. Snow itself was used as insulation, packed tightly against the outer walls. A barrier as effective as any brick. To step inside one of these shelters was to step into another world. Outside, the air stung with frost, your breath a cloud before your face. Inside, the space glowed with the flicker of firelight, smoke curling upward through carefully cut vents. The walls muffled the roar of the wind, the floor lined with furs that softened the cold. It was warm not in the sense of comfort, but in the sense of survival, enough to thaw stiff fingers, enough to keep a child alive through the night. For those who had never known such conditions, the transformation felt miraculous. Yet to the people of the Ice Age, it was simply life, built by hands that knew no other way. You, fumbling with stiff fingers, would struggle to contribute. The hides are heavy, requiring many arms to lift and secure. The bones are unwieldy, demanding strength and patience. The knots of sinew binding the frames together must be tied with precision, for even the smallest weakness invites collapse under the weight of snow. If you fail to tie a knot correctly, the shelter fails, and the group suffers. In this world, incompetence is not tolerated, not because of cruelty, but because survival is merciless. Every mistake has consequences. Fire was the second line of defense, and though it burned brightly, it was fragile. To you, fire is born at the strike of a match, an afterthought. To them, it was life conjured through labor and ritual. Sparks coaxed from flint and pyrite were caught in dry tinder, shavings of bone, flakes of fungus, grasses gathered and dried in rare patches of sunlight. With steady breaths and cupped hands, these sparks were nursed into flame, then fed carefully with twigs, then branches, until the fire grew strong enough to hold its own. The work was painstaking, and failure meant darkness and cold. Once lit, the fire became the heart of the shelter. Around it, people gathered not only for warmth, but for every aspect of existence. Food was cooked, hides were softened, tools were shaped, stories were told. The smoke curled upward, staining the hides overhead, leaving the scent of survival in the very fabric of the home. You would notice how each person tended the fire with reverence, feeding it scraps of wood, dung, or fat, never allowing it to weaken. To let the fire die was not simply negligence. It was betrayal. It meant exposing everyone to the teeth of the cold, and in that sense, fire was not only warmth, but trust itself. Beyond shelter and fire lay the tools, the quiet companions of survival, crafted with skill and care. Stone was shaped into blades, each flake chipped with precision by hands that had learned the language of rock. The smallest angle in the strike determined whether the blade was sharp or useless. Spears were hardened with fire, their points tipped with stone or bone. Needles carved from splinters of bone-stitched hides together, each puncture a step toward protection. These were not crude instruments, as some might imagine, but extensions of human will, honed over generations. For you, attempting to craft such tools would be an exercise in futility. The stones would shatter beneath clumsy strikes. The sinew would snap under careless tension. The needle would break between your fingers. It takes years of practice to transform raw materials into tools. And without those years, you would sit useless beside the fire, your hands empty while others worked. And in the Ice Age, empty hands meant empty stomachs, empty shelters, empty futures. Still, the tools were not merely practical. They were symbols of continuity, passed down from elders to youth, shaped by memory as much as by stone. A knife carved by a father might be used by his son, then buried with him when the end came. A spear that had felled a mammoth might be decorated with lines of ochre, a mark of honor. Even in survival, there was meaning. And even in tools, there was identity at night. When the wind howled outside and predators prowled unseen, the group huddled within their shelters, wrapped in furs, listening to the crackle of fire and the murmur of voices. This was the time when stories were told, not stories of fancy, but stories of survival, of ancestors who had faced winters as harsh, of hunts that had succeeded against impossible odds. These tales carried wisdom, warnings, and comfort. They reminded the group that they were part of something larger than themselves, a chain of survival stretching backward into time. You, sitting in the circle, would hear the rhythm of voices, the rise and fall of chants, the hum of songs. You might not understand the words, but you would understand the meaning. In the dark of the Ice Age, when every day threatened to be the last, stories were more than entertainment. They were warmth, as vital as fire, as binding as shelter. They told you that others had endured, and so perhaps you could endure too. But even within the glow of firelight, even within the safety of shelter, the cold pressed close. It seeped into bones, stiffened joints, dulled senses. The old coughed and wheezed, their bodies failing against the weight of frost. Children cried, their breath short, their faces flushed with fever. Death was never far, and when it came, it was met not with shock, but with ritual. The body was wrapped in hides, sometimes adorned with beads or ochre, sometimes laid to rest with tools. In death, as in life, there was no waste. Graves were carved into the frozen earth, marked by stones. Their presence a quiet defiance against the vastness of the cold. For you, this cycle would be unbearable. To see death so near, to feel its presence in every cough, every shiver, every silence, it would crush the spirit. But for them, it was life, as much a part of existence as birth or fire. They endured not because they were blind to suffering, but because they accepted it as woven into the fabric of their world, and in that acceptance lay strength. The Ice Age did not allow comfort, not in the way you know it. It allowed survival, nothing more. Every day was a negotiation with the cold, a bargain struck with fire and shelter and tools. The people of that time understood this bargain and honored it with every act. To live was to work, to build, to endure, and to remember. Without that, the cold claimed you swiftly and without mercy. You, unprepared and untrained, would falter at every step. Your shelter would collapse, your fire would die, your tools would fail. And in the silence that followed, the cold would press in, steady and patient, waiting for you to surrender. The Ice Age was never rushed. It did not need to be. It had all the time in the world, and against such time, only those who knew its rules could survive. Winter in the Ice Age was not something to be waited out in one place. not in the way that a modern family might weather a storm by staying indoors. The world itself demanded movement. Food was never permanent. Shelters could not always endure, and the very landscape shifted beneath layers of snow and ice. To remain in one place for too long was to risk starvation, to invite predators, to allow the cold to claim you. The people of that time understood this instinctively, and so their lives were lives of motion, a constant migration shaped by the seasons, the animals, and the land itself at first light. When the pale sun lifted above the horizon but offered little warmth, the group would prepare to move. Fires were smothered, the embers carefully gathered and carried in small bundles of dried moss or fungus, kept alive so they could be sparked again later. The shelters, so painstakingly built, were dismantled or abandoned, hides rolled up, bones left behind for others to find. Children were wrapped in furs and strapped to the backs of their mothers. Tools were bundled together, carried across shoulders, or dragged in crude sledges. Every step away from the safety of the camp was a risk, yet every step was necessary. For you, this movement would be exhausting beyond measure. The snow clung to your legs, every stride a battle against drifts that reached your knees. The wind pushed against your chest, turning your breath into ice. Your modern boots, if you had them, would fill with snow and soak through in hours. To walk even a few miles in such conditions would leave you gasping, your muscles aching, your body pleading for rest. But the group did not stop. They pressed forward, driven not by choice but by the knowledge that somewhere ahead lay food, or water, or shelter. To fall behind was to be lost, and no one could afford to wait for weakness. The routes they traveled were not random. Over generations, patterns had been learned, mapped not on paper but in memory. Herds of reindeer followed paths carved by instinct, and the people followed in turn, predicting where the animals would move. When the herds would pass, where rivers would freeze thick enough to cross, the land was a vast, shifting puzzle, and to survive meant knowing how its pieces fit together. A bend in a river might signal a good fishing spot. A line of hills might offer shelter from the wind. A cluster of trees, rare in that frozen landscape, might mean firewood or a hiding place from predators. These details were carried in the minds of elders and passed down to the young, spoken in stories that doubled as maps. The march of migration was not silent. The snow crunched underfoot, children whimpered softly, and the occasional call of a bird echoed in the distance. Sometimes the group would pause to listen, ears straining for the sound of hooves, the growl of wolves, or the crash of shifting ice. Every sound mattered. Every sign could mean the difference between safety and danger. You would notice how keenly they read the world, the angle of a footprint, the scattering of snow, the scent of animals carried on the wind. Their senses were sharp, honed by necessity, where yours would stumble and fail. When night approached, the group sought shelter wherever the land allowed. Sometimes it was a shallow cave, its entrance shielded with hides. Other times it was a hollow carved into a snowdrift, insulated by the very cold that threatened to kill. Fires were lit once more from the embers carried during the day, the flames rising as if reborn. The shelters were smaller, temporary, but still enough to hold back the night. Children slept, curled against their mothers. Adults took turns watching the fire, and always the sense of movement lingered. No one ever forgot that this place, too, would be left behind at dawn. The migration was not without peril. Ice cracked beneath careless steps, swallowing the unlucky into freezing water. Snowstorms arrived suddenly, blinding and suffocating, forcing the group to huddle together, blind to the path ahead. Wolves shadowed the march, their eyes glowing in the dark, waiting for weakness to reveal itself. And sometimes, despite all caution, weakness did emerge. The old, their joints stiff with frost, stumbled and fell. The young, feverish and frail, could not endure the endless cold. The group mourned, but the march could not stop. To stop was to risk the entire band, and so they moved forward, leaving grief behind in the snow. For you, raised in a world where distance is conquered by wheels and engines, the endless walking would be unthinkable. Your body would tire, your mind would rebel, demanding rest that could not be given. You might beg to stop, to pause for breath, to wait out the cold. But the Ice Age was not a place that granted pauses. It pushed and pushed, forcing every living thing to move or perish. To refuse the march was to freeze, to lie in the snow as the others disappeared into the distance. Your last breath lost in the wind. Yet migration was not only hardship. It was also the rhythm of life, a cycle that connected people to the land and to each other. The journey was a time of teaching, of passing knowledge to the young. Children learned to spot tracks, to read the stars, to recognize the feel of the ground beneath their feet. They learned how to walk in silence, how to balance loads, how to follow without falling behind. Each step prepared them for the day when they too would lead, when survival would depend on their strength. The migration also bound the group together. To move as one meant trust, meant cooperation. A fire carrier could not falter, or the group would face the night without flame. A hunter could not miss, or the group would face hunger. A mother could not let her child slip into the snow, or grief would follow. Each life was woven into the others, each burden carried by many hands. In this, there was a strength unknown to the solitary. To walk the endless path of winter was not something one could do alone. It was something only the group could endure. At times, the march revealed moments of beauty, fleeting yet unforgettable. The northern lights shimmered above the sky, painting the darkness with rivers of green and violet. Herds of reindeer thundered across the plains, their breath rising in clouds, their hooves striking sparks from the frozen ground. Ice cliffs glittered in the sun, glowing with a light that seemed otherworldly. For you, exhausted and frozen, these sights might pass unnoticed. But for those who lived within the Ice Age, they were reminders that even in hardship, the world held wonder. Beauty was not comfort, but it was strength, something to carry in memory through the endless cold. The migrations never truly ended. Even in spring, when the snow softened and rivers thawed, movement continued. Camps grew larger, hunts more plentiful, but always the next journey loomed. The people of that time were not settlers, not in the way you might imagine. They were wanderers, bound to the rhythm of the earth, their lives shaped by paths worn into the snow by those who had come before. You, with no memory of those paths, no knowledge of the signs, no strength for the journey, would falter again and again. You would stumble in the drifts, lose sight of the group, cry out into the storm, and the land would answer with silence. For the Ice Age cared nothing for you, nothing for your struggle. It demanded movement, and without it, you would vanish into the snow. Another forgotten traveler swallowed by the endless white. When the hunger set in, it was not a dull ache. It was a sharp, gnawing force that hollowed the body and clouded the mind. In the Ice Age, winter hunger was the great shadow that followed every group, as dangerous as the cold and as relentless as the snow. Fire could fight the frost, furs could shield the skin, but hunger burrowed deeper, stripping strength and stealing will. You would feel it quickly in that frozen world. Meals were never certain, and days could pass without a true feast. For the people of that time, survival meant hunting, and hunting in the winter was an ordeal that demanded patience, cunning, and a hardness that modern life has dulled in you. The land stretched silent and white, an expanse broken only by tracks pressed into the snow. The animals were the true rulers of this season, their movements deciding whether humans lived or starved. Reindeer, bison, and wild horses roamed in herds, but not always near. Mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses plodded through the distance, immense in size but dangerous beyond imagining. Smaller creatures, like hares and birds, offered quick meals, but they too were clever and wary. To eat in the Ice Age required more than weapons. It required an unyielding knowledge of the land and the ways of the creatures that crossed it. The hunters rose early, their breath clouding the air, tools in hand. Spears tipped with flint or bone, heavy clubs, stone blades. These were their instruments, primitive to your eyes, yet perfectly suited to the task. Some carried torches, others carried nets made of twisted fibers. They moved quietly, every step calculated, their senses attuned to the faintest shift in the snow. For you, accustomed to the idea of food waiting on shelves or delivered at a call, the very thought of tracking prey for days would be exhausting. But for them, it was a rhythm of life, as natural as breathing. Imagine the hunt for a herd animal. The group would stalk from a distance, careful not to startle the beasts too soon. They read the tracks pressed into the snow, the broken branches, the scats still warm. They measured the direction of the wind, for a wrong gust could carry their scent and send the herd fleeing. Then, at the chosen moment, they surged forward, shouting, waving torches, driving the animals into confusion. The goal was not always to strike the herd head-on, but to funnel them toward a trap. A pit dug into the earth and hidden beneath branches. A cliff's edge where panic would drive them to fall. Or a narrow passage where spears could strike from both sides. It was dangerous, always dangerous. An enraged bison could crush a hunter beneath its hooves. A mammoth, once wounded, could scatter the group with a sweep of its tusks. Even smaller animals could turn violent when cornered. For you, untrained and unprepared, to stand before such beasts would be unthinkable. Your hands would tremble on the shaft of a spear. Your legs would freeze at the sight of horns lowered toward you. You would falter where they surged forward, bound by generations of practice, driven by necessity that left no room for fear. But the hunt was more than brute force. It was strategy, a deep understanding of animal behavior. Hunters learned to mimic calls, to move in patterns that herded rather than scattered, to strike at the weakest without losing sight of the herd. They could tell by the depth of a track how heavy an animal was, by the spacing how fast it had moved, by the way snow lay disturbed how recently it had passed. Each detail, insignificant to your eyes, became a thread woven into the larger tapestry of survival when a kill was made. The moment was one of both triumph and urgency. The carcass steamed in the cold air, blood staining the snow. Hunters rushed forward with sharp blades, cutting quickly before predators arrived or the cold claimed too much of the meat. Every part was used. Flesh was carved into strips for roasting or drying. Fat was prized for its richness, burned for fuel or consumed for warmth. Bones were cracked for marrow, turned into tools, shaped into needles. Hides were skinned, cleaned, and stretched. later to become clothing or shelter. Nothing was wasted, for waste meant weakness, and weakness could not be afforded. The return to camp with food was a moment of relief, but it was also a reminder of fragility. A single successful hunt could feed the group for days, yet hunger always lingered at the edges. Fires flared as meat roasted, the scent rising into the frozen air. Children crowded close, their eyes wide, their stomachs growling. The first bites were always given to the young, the old, and the hunters who had risked their lives. Sharing was not kindness, but survival, for no one could endure alone. Still, food was never guaranteed. There were days when tracks vanished, when the snow buried all signs of prey, when traps lay empty and hunts returned with nothing. These were the days that truly tested the will of the people. Stomachs growled, tempers frayed, and the fire seemed weaker, smaller. Fat reserves dwindled, dried meat was rationed crumb by crumb, and even the youngest learned the taste of hunger. You would not last in such times. Your body, untrained in scarcity, would falter, growing weak, dizzy, desperate. Where they endured, hardened by lifetimes of hunger, you would break. Predators, too, were hunters of the Ice Age, and their presence added another layer of peril. Wolves stalked the same herds as humans, their howls echoing in the night. Saber-toothed cats prowled the edges of forests, their eyes gleaming in the firelight. Even bears, massive and territorial, competed for food. To secure a kill was not the end of danger. Often it was only the beginning, as the scent of blood drew rivals from the shadows. The people stood guard with torches and spears, knowing that a single lapse could mean losing everything. For you, faced with glowing eyes in the dark, the instinct would be to flee. But there was nowhere to flee to. In the Ice Age, the only choice was to stand, to defend, to survive or perish. Hunting was also a test of patience. There were no guarantees, no schedules. Sometimes hunters waited motionless for hours, crouched in the snow, their bodies stiff and numb, eyes fixed on a trail or a burrow. A hare might emerge, a bird might land, a fox might wander near. The smallest catch could mean another day of life, and so silence and stillness became as important as strength. You would struggle with such stillness, your body itching for movement, your mind wandering in the cold. But they endured it with a focus born of necessity, every muscle trained to obey survival. The hunt was not only for food, it was a ritual, a connection to the world that sustained them. Every kill was an exchange, life taken to preserve life. The people understood this balance, even honored it in ways you might not. They spoke to the animals, carved their shapes into stone, painted their forms on cave walls. To you, it might seem superstition, but to them, it was truth. Survival was not only about strength or skill, but about respect for the land and its creatures. Forgetting that respect was dangerous, for the world of the Ice Age was unforgiving to arrogance. As you imagine yourself within their hunt, feel the weight of the spear in your hands, the sting of wind on your face, the hunger that drives you forward. Imagine the crash of hooves, the roar of beasts, the blur of motion as life and death clashed in the snow. Know that your arms would tire, your courage would falter, your body would yield. And understand that they did not yield. They could not. Every hunt was survival. Every meal was life clawed back from the jaws of hunger and cold. You would not endure such trials, not in body, not in spirit. And yet, within the harshness of the hunt, there was something more, a unity, a shared purpose that bound them tighter than the fiercest storms. Together they moved, together they struck, together they carried the weight of the kill. The hunt was not merely a means to eat, but a proof of existence. A declaration that they could stand against the Ice Age and not be broken. For you, thrust into that world, such a declaration would never come. You would remain the outsider, struggling, stumbling, failing, while they carved their lives into the snow with blood and fire. When the hunt ended and the food was secured, survival was still far from assured. The Ice Age was not only a test of hunger, but of endurance, of countless daily tasks that kept the bitter cold from creeping into every bone. To you, accustomed to comfort and distraction, these tasks would feel endless, overwhelming, unrelenting. But for those who lived then, they were life itself. Each act, from striking flint against stone to scraping hides clean of fat carried weight. Nothing was done for leisure, nothing was done idly. The rhythm of their days was dictated by the unyielding demands of the cold. Fire was their most loyal companion, and yet also their most fragile. Without it, warmth vanished, food spoiled, predators crept closer. But fire could not be summoned with the flick of a switch. It demanded skill, patience, and vigilance. Flint was struck against pyrite or iron-bearing stone, the sparks landing on dried moss, fungus, or finely shaved bark. Breath was coaxed over the ember, careful, steady, until the flame caught and grew. You, with numb fingers and trembling hands, would fail long before the spark turned into light. But they knew the motions by heart. Even children learned early, their small hands guided by elders who understood that firekeeping was as essential as breathing. Once lit, fire became a constant responsibility. It was fed with wood, bone, and fat, tended throughout the day and guarded through the night. To let it die in the heart of winter was a catastrophe, for new fire was never guaranteed. Families carried embers in stone bowls or bark containers when they moved, glowing coals wrapped in moss to keep the flame alive. The fire was not only warmth, but protection. Its smoke kept predators at bay, its glow pushed back the shadows, and its crackle gave comfort against the silence of the snow. You might lean too close, seeking heat, but they knew how to balance, how to shield it with stones and hides, how to read its behavior like a companion's mood. Dot around the fire, work never ceased. Tools, worn from the hunt, had to be repaired. Flint knappers struck stone against stone, shaping sharp blades and spearheads with practiced precision. Each strike carried risk, for the shards flew sharp and fast, but their hands were steady. Bone was carved into needles, awls, and fishhooks. Antlers became spear tips or handles. You, with untrained fingers, would cut yourself, dull the edge, or snap the tool in half. For them, each strike, each scrape, was the continuation of knowledge passed through generations, as vital as bloodlines themselves. The hides brought back from the hunt were heavy with grease and flesh. To waste them would be unthinkable. They were scraped with sharp stones, stretched across frames, rubbed with fat or brains to soften them. Hours of labor turned them supple, ready to become cloaks, leggings, boots, or bedding. Women and men alike bent over the hides, their hands raw from work, their breath misting in the frigid air. Then came the sewing sinew drawn through holes punched by bone needles, clothing shaped layer by layer. It was not fashion but survival, garments crafted to trap heat, to shield skin from biting winds. You, in your soft, modern clothes, would freeze even when layered. Their work, rough to your eyes, was art in its own right. The difference between life and death, within the camp, Children were not idle. They gathered twigs for fuel, carried water in animal bladders or skins, practiced with small tools, watched the elders with sharp eyes. Learning came not through books, but through imitation. A child who could not help was a burden, and burdens did not last long in winters so harsh. They grew quickly into their roles, their laughter mingling with the crackle of fire, their small hands steadying tasks your own might fumble. To survive in that time meant to start learning as soon as you could walk. You, dropped suddenly into that world, would be helpless. A child among hardened survivors. The shelters were more than mere protection from the snow. They were built with intent, layer upon layer, designed to trap warmth and withstand storms. Some groups fashioned huts from mammoth bones, their ribs arched into frames, their tusks supporting walls, hides stretched tight across the structure. Others dug into the earth, burrowing half beneath the ground to escape the worst of the winds. Stones, brush, and snow were packed thick around the sides, sealing in precious warmth. Inside, the air was smoky, heavy with the smell of fat and fur, the floor lined with hides. It would seem cramped and dim to you, but to them it was sanctuary. The flicker of firelight against the walls was comfort. The sound of wind muted outside, a reminder of the strength they had carved against nature. Water, too, was work. Rivers froze, snow fell endlessly, but drinking from the wrong source brought sickness. Snow was melted in stone bowls set close to the fire. Ice was cracked from river edges, carried back in heavy chunks. You might scoop snow into your mouth, numbing your tongue, draining your body's warmth. They knew better. They understood that even something as simple as drinking demanded care. The daily rhythm was one of balance. Food, fire, water, shelter. Each had to be maintained. None could be neglected. The failure of one meant the failure of all. You would tire of the repetition, the endless cycle of chores, the lack of leisure or escape. But they did not tire, for the rhythm was survival, and survival was purpose enough. At night, when the winds howled across the plains and snow drifted against the shelter, they drew close together. Bodies pressed against one another beneath hides, fire flickering low, breath mingling in the dark. Stories were told then, low voices weaving memories and myths, teaching through words what hands had already shown. The children listened, wide-eyed, learning of hunts past, of animals that ruled the land, of spirits that dwelled in the fire and the sky. To you it might feel crude, but to them it was richness, it was culture. It was the stitching of their identity across generations, and even in those quiet hours, danger never fully slept. The sound of wolves could rise, distant at first, then circling closer. The crack of ice on the river might signal a sudden break. The roof of a shelter might sag under heavy snow. Every night carried uncertainty, every dawn was earned. You, lulled by modern safety, would never truly sleep in such a world. You would lie awake, your heart racing at every sound, your body tense, your mind frayed. But they found rest in exhaustion, in trust of one another, in the simple fact that waking to another day meant they had succeeded yet again in their battle with winter. It is easy to forget how much labor survival demanded, how constant it was, how it offered no pause. In your world, machines hum and lights flicker, stores brim with food and water flows at a turn. In theirs, every spark of fire, every drop of water, every strip of meat carried the weight of effort. The winter did not forgive laziness. You would not have the endurance for such unending demands. But they did, and it was that endurance, that carved their place in history, that carried them through the unforgiving ice age while you, transplanted into their world, would falter within days. The ice age was not only a trial of the body, but of the mind. Cold gnawed at the flesh, hunger hollowed the belly, but it was the silence, the endless whiteness, the long nights without sun that could unmake the human spirit. To survive required more than hides and fire. It required a resilience of thought, an ability to find meaning in repetition, to draw strength from togetherness, to endure losses that would shatter the heart. You, coming from a world filled with constant noise, would find the stillness unbearable. The days stretched long, the landscape empty save for the drifting snow, the sky dull and heavy. The only sounds were the crackle of fire, the crunch of footsteps in the frost, the distant cries of animals. Weeks could pass without meeting another band of people. The isolation was suffocating, and yet it was the norm. To keep the mind steady, stories were told, songs were hummed, rituals performed. These were not diversions, but anchors, threads that held a community together against the pull of despair. Without them, the silence could swallow you whole. Loss was constant, and grief was not a rare visitor, but a familiar shadow. Children fell ill and could not be saved, their small bodies no match for the fever or the cold. Hunters failed to return, their fates sealed by predators, storms, or accidents. Elders, their knowledge deep, but their bodies frail, often slipped away during the harshest months, their strength spent. You, unprepared for such frequency of death, would be undone by it. Yet for them, mourning was woven into survival. They buried their dead in shallow graves beneath the frozen earth, or laid them with care in caves, bodies wrapped in furs, sometimes adorned with beads, ochre, or tools. These were acts of respect, of continuity, of acknowledging that even in a world of scarcity, dignity was given. The weight of survival was heavy, and still they found ways to lighten it. Laughter existed, even there. Around the fire, after a successful hunt, children laughed at clumsy games. Hunters teased one another, songs rose into the smoky air. You might imagine their world as only bleak, but in truth, it was also filled with moments of warmth. They understood that the mind, like the body, needed tending. Joy was a necessity, not a luxury, for without it, the will to endure would crumble. Yet you, unfamiliar with such stark contrasts, would struggle to laugh while the cold pressed in, while hunger loomed. Your spirit would falter where theirs held fast. Fear was another constant. Predators did not only stalk the herds, they stalked the humans as well. Wolves prowled at the edges of camp, their eyes glinting in the firelight. Cave lions and hyenas followed at a distance, waiting for weakness. A single scream in the night could bring panic, the camp leaping awake, spears and stones in hand, hearts pounding. You would feel terror in every shadow, every flicker of movement beyond the fire's glow. But they learned to live with that fear, to let it sharpen rather than paralyze them. Children were taught early to recognize tracks, to stay close, to move silently. They accepted that fear was part of life, not something to be erased, but something to be endured. Perhaps the greatest mental burden was uncertainty. The hunt might fail. The fire might die. The river might freeze to solid. The cold might worsen beyond what even hides and shelters could resist. Every day carried the possibility of collapse, and yet they pressed forward. You, who crave guarantees, would not last long in such a world. The absence of certainty would grind you down, hollowing you with each passing day. But they adapted, shaping their minds to find certainty in one another. In rituals, in traditions, in the steady repetition of survival tasks. These things gave a rhythm that reassured the spirit even when the future was unknowable. The endless night of winter, when the sun barely touched the horizon, brought its own weight. Days blurred into darkness, and the fire was the only mark of time. You would struggle with the monotony, the lack of light, the disconnection from the world you know. But they made peace with the cycle. They told stories of the sun as a traveler, hidden for a time but always destined to return. In this belief lay patience, a patience you do not possess. It steadied their minds against the pull of hopelessness. Dreams carried power, too. Sleep in that world was not idle but sacred. Dreams were seen as messages, visions, guides. They were shared in the morning, interpreted by elders, woven into choices about hunting, movement, or rituals. To you, dreams are fleeting and often dismissed. To them, they were an essential part of survival, a way to give shape and meaning to a life filled with uncertainty. There were also rituals of resilience, bones carved with patterns, beads strung from shells or teeth, paintings smeared across cave walls in reds, blacks, and ochres. These acts might seem unnecessary to you, but they were lifelines. They connected people to one another, to their ancestors, to forces greater than themselves. They gave meaning beyond the hunt, beyond the cold, beyond survival. Without such meaning, the harshness of life would strip the soul bare. You, living without these rituals, would wither beneath the weight of meaninglessness. Even companionship carried a burden and a blessing. In small groups, conflict was inevitable. Tempers flared, disputes over food or tasks arose, jealousy sparked. But conflict threatened survival, so resolution was sought. Leaders spoke with authority, elders gave counsel, compromises were made. Bonds were tested constantly, but reinforced through necessity. You might retreat, isolate, or refuse, but they understood that togetherness was the only path forward. Isolation was death, cooperation was life. The mind, body, and spirit were tested every day, not just once, not just in great events, but in the endless grind of survival. You, accustomed to comfort, would collapse beneath the strain of monotony, fear, loss, and silence. But they endured because they had to, because there was no alternative, because every step forward was proof of their strength. Their resilience was not heroic, but practical, not celebrated, but lived. To imagine yourself there, in their world, is to feel the weight of 1,000 invisible burdens pressing down. It is to realize that the Ice Age winter was not simply cold, but relentless, not simply harsh, but all-encompassing. You would not survive because your body would fail, yes, but more than that, because your mind would falter. The silence, the fear, the grief, the uncertainty, these would undo you long before hunger or frostbite struck. But they, the people of that time, bore those burdens as naturally as breath, for in their resilience lay the path to the future you now inhabit. Winter in the Ice Age was a season that seemed to stretch endlessly, and yet, beneath the weight of snow and silence, small signs began to emerge that told people it would not last forever. To the untrained eye, these changes were almost invisible. But to those who had lived their lives according to the rhythms of the earth, the subtle shifts in wind, the behavior of animals, the length of daylight were messages of survival. You, however, would not see them. The endless white would blur together, and you would despair, believing the cold would never release its hold. For the Ice Age people, hope was not a fleeting wish, but a skill, a practice woven into their daily lives. Around the fire, as the nights remained long and heavy, elders told stories of the cycles of the world. They spoke of the sun as a mighty hunter who traveled far in the winter, but who would always return with warmth and light. They spoke of animals as sacred companions, spirits who endured the cold alongside humanity, whose survival meant the survival of people. These tales were not entertainment in the way you understand it. They were instruction, reminders that patience and endurance had purpose. Without such meaning, the crushing monotony of winter would suffocate the spirit as the darkest part of the season eased. The days grew just a little longer. The sun lingered on the horizon for moments more than before, painting the snow in faint gold before vanishing again. For those who watched closely, it was a reassurance that the cycle continued. They did not measure time with calendars or clocks, but with shadows and seasons. This change was celebrated, not with grand festivals, but with small rituals. Offerings of carved bone placed at the edge of camp, painted symbols on hides, or chants whispered into the flames. He would not recognize such small gestures as hope, but to them they were essential. Hope was not abstract. It was made visible in every act of endurance. Animals, too, carried signs of the coming shift. The wolves grew leaner, their movements more desperate as food became scarce. The great herds, though diminished, began to stir, restless beneath the snow. Birds that had disappeared returned faintly on the horizon, their wings cutting through the cold air. Hunters read these changes as carefully as you might read a book. They saw in every track and flight a message that spring was near. You, untrained in such observation, would miss these messages entirely, left adrift in the belief that winter was eternal. The body also bore the weight of the changing season. By the end of winter, people were thinner, weaker, their muscles worn from constant struggle. Supplies of dried meat and fat dwindled, and every meal was measured carefully. Hunger gnawed at the belly, but endurance carried them through. For you, used to steady abundance, such scarcity would break your will long before the thaw. The slow starvation of late winter required a kind of patience you do not know, a trust that the earth would provide again if only one could last a little longer. Children carried a strange resilience during this time. Their laughter, though quieter, still echoed through camp. They played with carved figurines made from antler or bone. They chased one another in the snow, their joy defying the cold. To you, their world would seem unbearable, and yet, in their small games, they carried the spirit of hope. Elders watched them closely, drawing strength from their resilience, knowing that life would continue through them. You, without such deep ties to the continuity of generations, would find little reason to fight when despair set in. Even the fire carried symbolic weight as winter shifted. Each night, it was tended with greater care, for it was believed the flame itself echoed the sun's return. Sparks rose into the dark sky like messengers, carrying prayers upward. The crackle of wood was not simply noise, but comfort, a rhythm against the silence. You would treat fire as a tool, but they treated it as kin, as a living presence to be honored. Without this reverence, you would not find the strength to rise day after day. Rituals marked the slow transition. In caves, ochre was smeared onto walls, fresh layers added to old paintings. Hands were pressed against stone, leaving outlines that spoke silently across generations. Carved figures of animals were placed near hearths, offerings to the spirits of the hunt. Songs rose, simple and low, words carried from ancestors whose names were long forgotten but whose wisdom endured. These acts gave the community a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. a thread that bound them not just to the present, but to past and future alike. You, without ritual, would drift untethered, consumed by isolation. At times, rare moments of abundance broke the hunger. A lucky hunt might bring down a weakened bison or reindeer, its meat shared among all, its hide stretched and prepared for use, its bones carved into tools. Such victories were celebrated not with feasts in your sense, but with solemn gratitude. Songs were sung to honor the animal, prayers spoken to thank its spirit. Children ate first, then elders, then the rest, each bite a reminder of survival. You, unaccustomed to reverence for food, would fail to grasp the depth of such gratitude. For them, it was not merely nourishment, but communion, a bond between life and life. The faintest changes in the landscape also brought hope. Snow softened, its crust breaking underfoot. Ice on rivers began to crack, water whispering beneath. Sap stirred faintly in hidden roots, unseen but sensed. These signs carried weight, for they meant the world was waking. You, who live with seasons measured on a calendar, would not notice such subtleties, but they were everything. They told the Ice Age people that the end of hardship was near, that patience had not been in vain, even in the hardest weeks. When hunger pressed and the cold lingered, there was resilience in song. Low chants around the fire kept rhythm with the heartbeat. Voices joined in harmony, sometimes soft, sometimes strong, weaving together in the smoke. These songs were not performed for pleasure, but for survival. They reminded each person that they were not alone, that the struggle was shared, that voices together could defy silence. You, without such communal rituals, would lose yourself in despair, and then, slowly, unmistakably, spring would arrive. The sun rose higher, the air softened, the herds moved north again. The long grip of winter loosened, and life emerged where death had seemed absolute. For them, this was not merely relief, but triumph. To have survived meant their patience, their rituals, their endurance had meaning. For you, the struggle would already have ended in failure. You would not have seen the thaw, would not have felt the first warmth, would not have tasted the first fresh greens pulled from the soil. The winter would have claimed you long before the promise of renewal. Thus the Ice Age people endured, not because their bodies were stronger than yours, but because their spirits were bound to cycles of endurance, ritual, and hope. They saw meaning where you would see only emptiness. They found patience where you would find despair. They held together where you would fall apart. The thaw was not just a season, but a reward for resilience. You, placed in their world, would never reach it. When the thaw finally arrived, it did not come with the sudden sweep of warmth that you might imagine, but with a slow, almost hesitant release. The snow began to soften, its hard crust giving way to slush beneath the weight of footsteps. Streams cracked open with sharp reports that echoed through valleys, sending thin trickles of water winding across the land. The sun, once low and pale, climbed higher, spreading a fragile warmth that painted the ice in shimmering layers. For the Ice Age people, this was a moment of quiet triumph, a sign that endurance had borne fruit. For you, had you somehow managed to survive the endless winter, it would feel like deliverance. But in truth, this season would present its own trials. Trials you would not endure for long. Spring in the Ice Age was a season of urgency. Every creature that had weathered the winter awoke to the same truth. The time of plenty was brief, and survival required preparation for the next cycle of cold. The people knew this well. As soon as the snow receded, they gathered, traveled, and hunted with feverish purpose. Tools were mended, Hides were scraped, firewood collected anew. Children were set to work, gathering early greens and roots from the thawing earth, while hunters followed the herds as they began their migrations northward. There was no rest. To pause too long would mean entering the next winter unprepared, and unpreparedness meant death. You, overwhelmed by the sudden intensity of labor after months of scarcity, would falter quickly. The herds themselves moved like rivers across the plains. Mammoths, reindeer, bison, and horses surged forward in vast, thundering numbers. For the Ice Age people, this was both opportunity and danger. A successful hunt in spring could mean meat, hides, sinew, and bone enough to secure a community for weeks, perhaps months. But the hunt was perilous. Men and women worked together to drive the herds into ravines or toward hidden traps. Spears in hand, their movements guided by generations of knowledge. One mistake could lead to disaster. A misstep, a slip on wet ground, and a hunter could be trampled beneath hooves or crushed against stone. You, untrained in such coordinated risks, would not last a moment in the frenzy of the chase. Once the animal fell, the work had only just begun. Entire groups descended on the carcass, knives and scrapers flashing in the sunlight. Flesh was carved into strips for drying. Fat was collected for fuel and food. Sinew was separated for thread, and bones were set aside for tools and shelters. Nothing was wasted. Children carried smaller bundles, elders oversaw the careful division, and songs were sung to honor the spirit of the fallen beast. You, accustomed to waste and detachment from the source of food, would find such labor overwhelming. The smell of blood, the weight of flesh, the urgency of preservation before spoilage would break your resolve. Water, too, changed with the season. The frozen rivers ran fast and cold, carrying with them chunks of ice that clattered against stones. Fresh water was abundant, but it was not taken for granted. People filled hides and vessels, storing what they could, for even in summer, droughts could strike. The rivers also carried fish, and lines woven from sinew or traps of woven branches were set to capture them. It was a quieter form of hunting, but no less vital. You might see in this abundance a reprieve, a time to relax. But to them, it was a warning. The window of plenty was narrow, and every moment of idleness risked future hunger. The camps themselves shifted with the season. Temporary shelters of hides and bones were replaced with sturdier structures where possible, reinforced for the year to come. Some groups followed the herds across vast distances, moving camp again and again, carrying their lives on their backs. Others stayed near rivers or caves, relying on the abundance of fish and plants. Both ways demanded constant labor. Fires were kept burning, hides stretched and smoked, tools sharpened and repaired. You would be lost in this endless rhythm of necessity, exhausted by the lack of rest, unable to see that this ceaseless work was survival itself. Spring was also a season of ritual renewal. With life returning to the land, people marked the change with ceremonies. Dancers painted themselves with ochre, their movements echoing the migration of animals. Hands pressed new prints onto cave walls, joining the ancient marks of ancestors. Stories were told by firelight. Stories not only of survival, but of gratitude. Gratitude for the herds, for the rivers, for the sun's return. To you, these rituals might seem unnecessary, a distraction from the urgency of labor. But without them, the people would lose the meaning that bound them together. They knew that food filled the body, but ritual filled the spirit, and both were necessary to endure the next winter. The children flourished in spring. Their laughter grew louder, their games more daring as the earth softened beneath their feet. They mimicked the hunts of their elders, practicing with small spears, chasing each other across the plains. They gathered flowers and roots, their small hands quick to learn which plants were safe and which were deadly. Each child was both a reminder of the future and a worker in the present, their presence essential to the community's survival. You, seeing the harshness of their lives, might pity them, but to them, this was life itself, and they carried it with resilience beyond your imagining. Yet even in abundance, death remained close. The 4 revealed bodies lost in winter, animals trapped in ice, hunters who had fallen and not returned. These discoveries were met with reverence. The dead were honored with quiet words. Their remains sometimes carried to sacred places, sometimes left where they had fallen. Death was not feared as you might fear it, but woven into the cycle of existence. You, confronted with such constant reminders, would be shaken, unable to carry the weight of mortality so plainly displayed. The air itself was alive with change. Birds returned in flocks, their calls ringing across the plains. Insects swarmed over thawing ground, buzzing and crawling, feeding on what remained of the winter's death. The scent of damp earth rose, rich and heavy, mingling with the smoke of fires and the musk of animals. To the Ice Age people, these were signs of life's resilience, proof that the world turned as it always had. You, overwhelmed by the intensity of it all, would find little comfort in the noise, the smell, the constant reminder that survival required motion without pause. And so, spring and summer were not seasons of rest, but of frantic preparation. The Ice Age people understood this truth with every breath they took. They knew that the warmth was fleeting, that the sun would turn again, that winter would return with its crushing weight. Every task, every ritual, every hunt was a step toward readiness for that inevitability. You, lulled by the illusion of abundance, would falter. You would eat too much, work too little, waste what could not be spared. When winter returned, as it always did, you would face it empty-handed. For them, survival was not a matter of the moment, but of foresight, of discipline, of communal strength. For you, it would remain an insurmountable challenge, for the patience and endurance required were foreign to your life. The Ice Age did not allow comfort, only preparation, and without that, you would vanish with the first frost of the next season. The heart of summer in the Ice Age was a paradox. To modern eyes, you might imagine it as a season of ease, of warmth, of long days filled with leisure. But to the people of that era, it was not leisure that defined the season, but urgency sharpened by memory. The warmth was precious, but they knew it would not last. Each sunrise marked another chance to prepare for the cold, and each sunset was a reminder that time slipped quickly toward winter once again. The plains and forests came alive in summer. Grasslands stretched in swaying seas of green, dotted with wildflowers and stalks heavy with seeds. Rivers roared with melted snow, their waters surging fast and clear. Animals flourished in staggering numbers. Herds of mammoth moved slowly, grazing across valleys, while reindeer and bison thundered across open fields in restless migrations. Wolves prowled the edges of these herds, patient and calculating, and great cats slinked through the grasses, their golden eyes fixed on prey. The air itself vibrated with life, with buzzing insects, trilling birds, and the far-off calls of animals echoing across the horizon. To the people, this abundance was both gift and warning. For you, it would be overwhelming, a world too vast, too alive, and too unforgiving to comprehend. Hunting in summer was relentless. While spring brought migrations, summer offered opportunities for more strategic hunts. Traps were laid in rivers, spears hurled in ambushes, and coordinated drives forced animals into natural enclosures. Each hunt was dangerous, yet essential. The Ice Age people had developed intricate methods to preserve the bounty of summer. Meat was cut thin and hung on wooden racks, dried in the hot sun or smoked over slow-burning fires until it hardened into stores that could last for months. Fat was melted and poured into containers made from bone or skin, then sealed for later use. Plants were gathered in enormous quantities, berries dried into dense cakes, roots roasted and stored, seeds ground into meal. To them, summer was a season of collection, not consumption. For you, however, the temptation to indulge in abundance would be your undoing. You would feast without restraint, failing to prepare. And by the time the earth froze again, you would find yourself empty-handed. The work of summer was communal. Groups moved together through fields, gathering wild grains by hand, cutting stalks with stone blades, carrying them back in woven baskets. Women and men alike bent to the task, their movements practiced, efficient, honed by necessity. Children were not spared from labor. Their small hands were ideal for picking berries from thorny bushes or gathering eggs from nests. Elders offered knowledge, instructing the young on which plants healed and which poisoned, which mushrooms could be eaten and which brought death. For you, accustomed to lives of specialization, the endless rhythm of collective work would feel foreign and exhausting. Every hand was required. Idleness was not permitted. Summer was also the season of predators. With herds roaming freely, wolves and lions hunted boldly, often clashing with humans over kills. Fires were kept burning at the edges of camps to ward them off, but even so, animals sometimes struck. Stories spread of hunters dragged down by wolves in the night, or of children seized by great cats that prowled too close. To live in this season was to live in constant vigilance. Spears were always within reach, and ears remained alert to the rustle of grass or the snap of a twig. You, untrained in this heightened awareness, would be caught unprepared, a victim of the predators who shared the same hunger as the people. Disease, too, flourished in the heat. Wounds that had festered through the cold could swell in the warmth, attracting swarms of flies. Infections spread easily through cuts made by stone tools, or from bites delivered in the chaos of hunts. There were no medicines in the sense you might expect, no potions or salves that could reliably cure. Healing came from plants, from smoke, from ritual, and from the body's own resilience. Some survived, many did not. You, unused to such raw conditions, would falter quickly at the first fever or the smallest wound that grew infected. In the Ice Age, even a thorn could kill. Yet summer was not without joy. It was a season of gathering not only food, but stories. Around the fires, as the nights stretched long, people spoke of hunts, of ancestors, of spirits tied to the land. Songs echoed across valleys, their rhythms carrying the memory of generations. Bodies painted in red and black ochre moved in dances, mimicking the animals they hunted, honoring their lives, binding the community together in celebration of the world's abundance. These rituals were as important as the work itself, for they reminded the people of their place in the great cycle of life and death. You, standing among them, might feel awe but not belonging. The rhythms would be foreign, the meaning unclear. And without that thread of understanding, you would drift further from survival. Summer's warmth also exposed vulnerability. With fewer furs worn, bodies were more exposed to insects, to sun, to sudden storms. Thunder rolled across plains, lightning striking dry grasses and setting fires that swept fast and wild across the land. Rain came in torrents, swelling rivers, drowning camps, washing away supplies. The people adapted. They moved their camps higher, built barriers against floods, and prepared to abandon anything they could not carry. They lived with the knowledge that nature could not be controlled, only endured. You, unprepared to see shelter collapse in a storm or food swept away by water, would find yourself helpless before forces that cared nothing for your needs. The children of summer carried lessons for the future. They played not merely for amusement, but to learn the skills they would need. With miniature spears, they practiced the hunt. With scraps of hide, they learned to sew. With songs, they absorbed the stories that preserved their people's identity. Each game was a rehearsal for survival, each moment of laughter laced with preparation. To you, their play might seem simple, but in truth, it was a lifeline stretched across generations. Without such preparation, no group could endure the Ice Age. You, arriving without this foundation, would remain forever outside of that chain of survival. As the days lengthened, the urgency grew sharper. The Ice Age people could feel, in their bones, the turning of the year. The shadows shifted, the nights grew cooler, and they knew the warmth was beginning to retreat. This knowledge was not accompanied by despair, but by action. It was time to double their stores, to reinforce shelters, to ready themselves once again for the cold. There was no illusion of permanence, no hope that summer might last. They knew the truth. It would end, and quickly. You, lulled by the false promise of long days and abundant food, would ignore the signs until it was too late. Thus, summer was never truly a season of ease, but of ceaseless preparation. To endure in the Ice Age required a constant balance of joy and labor, of vigilance and gratitude. The people embraced both, their lives interwoven with the cycles of the earth. For you, thrust into such a season, survival would slip away, not in the bitterness of winter, but in the abundance of summer. For it was not the cold alone that tested endurance, but the ability to see beyond the present into the future. And in that skill, you would always falter. As the long arc of summer bent toward its close, the land itself seemed to grow restless. The days were still warm, sometimes stifling beneath the unrelenting sun, but the light had shifted in tone. Shadows lengthened, mornings arrived with mist on the fields, and in the cool of evening there was a whisper of chill that reminded everyone of what was coming. The Ice Age people read these signs with practiced eyes. They knew that abundance, no matter how generous, was fleeting, and they moved with greater urgency to prepare for what lay ahead. Autumn was not a distinct season in the Ice Age as we know it now. It was more a brief turning, a transition from warmth to cold that unfolded quickly. For the people, this turning meant harvest, collection, and movement. The great herds shifted direction, following ancient migration paths that had been carved into the memory of the land itself. Reindeer began their long trek toward southern valleys. Mammoths ambled toward river plains, and bison pressed together in dense groups, their instincts carrying them to pastures that might sustain them through winter. The humans followed in smaller bands, their own survival tied to the movements of these creatures. To live in this season was to live in pursuit. Families packed their camps and traveled after the herds, often walking for days across open tundra, through forests thick with falling leaves, or along rivers that were beginning to slow in their flow. Each journey was filled with hardship. The people carried what they could: tools, weapons, skins, dried food, the knowledge of where to find water and shelter. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left to chance. You, dropped into such a march, would falter within hours. The weight of supplies alone would bend your back, and the endless walking across uneven ground would sap your strength. The people endured because endurance was all they had. Hunting during the turn of the season grew riskier. Animals were leaner, faster, more cautious after months of pursuit. The hunters knew this, and their strategies became more daring. They worked in larger groups, driving reindeer into rivers where they could be speared, or forcing bison toward cliffs where the herd's own momentum became its downfall. These methods required timing, coordination, and courage. A single mistake could cost lives. To watch such a hunt would fill you with awe and terror. The noise of pounding hooves, the cries of hunters, the crashing of animals into water or over stone. It was a storm of motion, and in the midst of it, the hunters placed themselves at mortal risk. When a kill was made, there was no waste. The animals were butchered with skill, every part taken. Flesh was cut and dried, fat stored in bladders, sinew stripped for bowstrings, bones shaped into tools, hides prepared for clothing and shelter. Even the stomachs of animals were emptied and cleaned, used as containers. For the people, this cycle was sacred. Each life taken gave life in return. For you, raised in a world of excess and discard, the thoroughness of their use would seem both shocking and humbling. Nothing was left behind, for to leave anything was to court hunger later. Autumn also demanded a harvest of plants. Families spread across valleys, collecting the last berries, digging roots before the earth hardened, stripping trees of nuts and seeds. Grains, where they could be found, were gathered by the handful, beaten into baskets, ground into flour with stone. These were stored carefully, sometimes in pits lined with stone, sometimes sealed in skins and buried beneath earth to protect them from animals and frost. The work was endless, yet it carried a rhythm that bound the community together. Songs were sung during harvest, chants that reminded everyone of the cycles of nature and their role within it. You, standing among them, might recognize the beauty of this rhythm, but you would not endure the labor. Your hands would blister, your back would ache, and the calluses of their world would never form on your skin. With the shortening days came the first true warnings of winter. Frost appeared on grasses in the mornings, rivers glazed with ice at their edges, and winds shifted from soft breezes to biting gusts. The people took these warnings seriously. Camps were reinforced with thicker hides, fires were built stronger, and the first layers of fur were worn again at night. Children were wrapped tightly in skins, their laughter rising through clouds of breath that marked the chill. For them, the cold was not a surprise, but a returning guest, unwelcome but expected. For you, the sudden bite of frost after months of warmth would be jarring, a reminder of how fragile your body truly is. Autumn was also the time of migrations for the people themselves. Some groups traveled south, following rivers into more temperate lands, while others remained in the north, confident in their stores and their shelters. These decisions were not made lightly. To move meant danger, crossing unknown territory, clashing with rival groups, risking starvation if herds were missed. To stay meant facing the full force of winter in the same place. Each choice carried weight, and each leader bore the burden of guiding their people wisely. You, untested, would find such decisions impossible. Without knowledge of the land or the instincts passed through generations, you would choose poorly, and your fate would be sealed by ignorance. The spirit life of autumn was intense. Rituals were performed to honor the animals, to thank the earth for its gifts, and to plead for protection in the coming cold. Fires blazed high, and dancers circled them with painted faces, their movements mimicking the creatures they hunted. Bones were cast into flames as offerings, smoke rising into the night sky as a bridge between worlds. To you, these rituals might seem strange, but to them, they were essential acts of balance. Without respect for the forces that governed life, survival would be hollow, luck would turn sour, and winter would strike harder. As autumn deepened, the people grew quieter. The frenzy of summer work had slowed, and though labor remained constant, there was a heaviness in the air. Each family measured their stores, counted their dried meat, inspected their furs, and wondered silently if it would be enough. They had lived through winters before, some harsher than others, and they knew well how quickly supplies could vanish. Hunger was always waiting at the edge of memory. You would not understand this weight until it pressed upon you. You would look at the piles of food and feel secure, not realizing how swiftly those piles shrank under the long hand of winter. By the time the first snows fell, autumn was already ending. A thin dusting at first, it lay across fields like a warning. The people tightened their shelters, huddled closer to fires, and began the season of waiting. They had prepared as best they could, but they knew the truth. Survival was never guaranteed. For you, the sight of that first snow might stir wonder. For them, it stirred caution. For both, it meant the end of ease and the beginning of trial. Thus, the turn from summer into autumn was not a gentle fading, but a swift descent into urgency. The Ice Age people lived within that urgency, embracing it as natural law. They harvested, hunted, stored, and prayed, each act a strand woven into the web of survival. For you, untrained, unprepared, and unrooted in their rhythms, this transition would mark the beginning of your undoing. The frost would creep into your bones, the hunger into your belly, and you would finally understand what they had always known, that to live in this world required not only strength and skill, but foresight, discipline, and a reverence for the forces beyond control. Without these, you would not last a day, much less a winter. The first true snow did not fall gently, but with a weight that silenced the land. Overnight, the world changed. The grasslands were buried beneath a crust of white. Rivers slowed beneath frozen skins of ice, and the once familiar trails vanished as if they had never existed. The people awoke to a silence so deep that even the call of birds was absent. The sky hung low and grey, and the breath of every living thing rose in visible clouds. This was the beginning of winter, and all who lived through it knew that it was a season not of days but of trials. For the people of the Ice Age, winter was not a backdrop. It was an adversary, cunning and relentless, pressing against them with cold, hunger, and fear. Survival was a daily negotiation. Fires had to be kept alive, food measured with ruthless care, and shelter fortified against winds that could strip warmth from flesh in minutes. Families huddled close together, bodies pressed beneath furs, the glow of the hearth their only shield. To step outside for long was to risk death. To remain inside too long was to risk despair. For you, raised in a world of endless comfort and control, the sudden imprisonment of winter would crush your spirit before it claimed your body. The hunters continued their work, though the conditions grew dire. Snow muffled their steps, but also masked dangers. Ice cracked beneath careless feet. Wolves shadowed their movements. And winds carried scents farther than before, warning prey of their presence. Hunts grew fewer and farther between, and each success was cherished like treasure. A single reindeer, felled in the snow, could mean another week of survival. Yet the dangers were ever present. A hunter injured far from camp might never return, swallowed by the storm. His absence marked only by the silence that followed. You would not last a single hunt. The cold would stiffen your fingers, dull your reflexes, and strip you of the precision needed to throw a spear or notch an arrow. Inside the shelters, life took on a rhythm of endurance. Work did not cease simply because the world outside was frozen. Women scraped hides with stone tools, softening them into clothing or blankets. Children were taught the crafts of their people, shaping small figures from bone, practicing with miniature bows, listening to the stories of ancestors. Elders recited these tales with a gravity that reminded all of their place within the endless cycle of life and death. Storytelling was not entertainment alone, but instruction, a way of passing knowledge that might mean survival. For you, unaccustomed to listening with such intent, the stories might blur into background noise. But for them, each word was a thread tying the present to the past. And without that thread, the future could unravel. The cold was constant, a weight pressing into every crack of life. Fires had to be tended at all hours, fed with wood or bone or dried dung. Gathering fuel was itself a struggle. Men and women ventured out into the howling winds, chopping at frozen trees with stone axes, or prying branches from the earth where snow was thin. Their faces froze, their skin cracked, their breath turned to frost on their clothing. Yet without fuel, the fire died, and with the fire died everything. You might think yourself strong enough to endure a short trip into the storm, but the cold would claim your strength within minutes. Fingers would stiffen, eyes would water and freeze, lungs would burn, and by the time you staggered back to camp, you would already be broken. Food stores dwindled faster than anyone liked to admit. Dried meat, once stacked in abundance, grew scarce. Fat, the most precious of all foods, was rationed carefully, measured into small portions to stretch its warmth through weeks. Hunger gnawed at bellies, and the weakest often suffered first. Children cried quietly in the night, their voices muffled by exhaustion. Mothers gave their share of food to the young. Fathers pressed on through hunts despite their hollow eyes. Each day was a calculation of who could endure a little longer. For you, raised in a world where hunger is a rarity, the constant ache in your stomach would become unbearable. The weakness it brought would paralyze you, leaving you unable to work, unable to walk, unable even to think clearly. Predators moved closer to human camps in winter. Wolves, lean and desperate, circled the edges of firelight, their eyes gleaming in the dark. Cave lions prowled the edges of the plains, their growls rolling across the snow like thunder. Even the great bears stirred from their dens when hunger drove them, their hulking forms leaving tracks that filled humans with dread. The people built barriers of sharpened stakes, posted watch through the long nights, and kept fires blazing high. Yet attacks still came. A wolf lunging in the dark, a lion slipping into camp under the howl of wind, a bear crashing through a shelter wall. To face such an attack was to fight not only for survival, but for every life in the group. For you, frozen in terror, the sound of snapping jaws would be your final memory. The nights of winter were long beyond measure. Darkness stretched for hours upon hours, broken only by the flicker of flames. Time lost meaning in such endless night. People marked days by feeding cycles, by the dwindling pile of food, by the telling of stories that circled back on themselves. Sleep came in fragments, stolen when fear and hunger allowed. Dreams were vivid, filled with images of summer warmth, of green fields and flowing rivers. Children sometimes woke crying, reaching for things they had never known, while adults stared silently into the fire, their faces hollow with fatigue. You would not endure such nights. The silence alone would crush you, the weight of hours pressing into your mind until despair overtook you. Spiritual life deepened during winter. Shamans lead rituals in the dark, their voices rising above the crackle of fire, calling to spirits for mercy. Charcoal was smeared across faces, drums beaten with slow, steady rhythm, bones cast into flames. Visions were sought in smoke and trance, guidance begged from ancestors and unseen forces. These rituals gave meaning to suffering, reminding the people that they were not alone, that their trials were part of something larger. For you, such rituals might seem strange or meaningless, yet without them, despair would hollow the soul. The people endured because they believed endurance had purpose. You would falter because you lacked such belief. As the weeks wore on, the cold grew sharper. Temperatures plunged lower, winds screamed louder, and storms swept across the land with fury. Entire camps vanished beneath snow, shelters buried so deep that only the smoke of fires betrayed life within. People dug themselves out daily, carving tunnels through drifts just to reach the surface. The work was endless, the exhaustion profound. Yet they continued, because stopping meant death. For you, each storm would be a disaster. The labor of digging, the biting wind, the crushing weight of snow, it would drain the last of your strength, leaving you broken long before the season ended. And yet, even in such darkness, there were moments of light. Children played games inside shelters, carving figures from bone, laughing as softly as hunger allowed. Couples whispered to each other in the dark, sharing warmth beneath furs. Songs were sung in low voices, melodies that rose and fell like wind over plains. In these small acts, the people found hope. They reminded themselves that winter was not forever, that spring would come, that life would endure. This hope was as essential as food or fire, for without it, the spirit would wither before the body. You, unfamiliar with such fragile hope, might fail to recognize its power. But for them, it was the thread that carried them forward. By the time the first cracks of spring light pierced the horizon, many had already been lost, some to hunger, some to predators, some simply to the cold that would not relent. Yet those who survived emerged hardened, carrying the scars of winter as proof of their endurance. They stepped out into melting snow, into rivers beginning to flow again, into fields where the first green shoots pushed stubbornly upward. They knew that summer would be brief, that abundance would be fleeting, and that winter would always return. But they also knew that they had survived, and in survival there was triumph. You, however, would not have seen that spring. Winter would have broken you long before, your body too frail, your spirit too unprepared, your will too weak. For the Ice Age people, survival was not just possible, but expected. For you, it would be impossible, because you were not born into their world, nor trained in their ways, nor bound by their faith in the cycles of life. You would not have survived a single winter in the Ice Age, and the land itself would have claimed you, as it had claimed countless before.